Thanks for tuning in to the Football Talk Squadron. I'm Dutch.
And I'm Maul.
And for this episode, we're going to skip the Guess the Player because I think we got a pretty good little episode here. We're doing the best college players. We're going to build a team with their positions from the year 2000 on. And the reason we're doing that, we're really trying to focus on like the guys that we grew up watching, so that because it's difficult. I know Maul will probably chime in with some of this stuff. It's like, when you look at running backs, it's hard to ignore like Herschel Walker, Bo Jackson, all those guys, Marcus Allen. But at the same time, like I never got to see those guys play in college. I wasn't even born.
So. Yeah, I think another important distinction too is we're taking into consideration just what they did in college, like not what like their pro career ended up being or anything like that. Just strictly how they played in college.
Correct, which I think makes us like even better because there's definitely guys on my list that I look at, and also guys like I'm leaving off because of like in college they were great. It's some of them, like one of the guys I have at wide receiver I think did well in the pros. By no means was he like a Hall of Famer. He was a starter, but like compared to what like people thought he was coming out of college, like totally different career.
Sure.
Which makes it interesting. So
see, my perfect example is like Troy Polamalu. Like, was Troy Polamalu good at USC? Yeah, sure. Like nobody thought he was bad. He obviously, but like Troy Polamalu in everybody's mind is this Hall of Fame, like legendary safety. And like, yes, that's who he was in the NFL, but wasn't quite like the top safety in college. So that's where he would get left off this list.
Yeah. And we'll probably have a bunch of those because I know I have my list of guys that I like sit back and I'm like, ooh, like,
oh yeah, it's tough.
It's tough.
You think you know it, like you're like, ooh, that'd be easier. Like you could come up with all these good guys, but then you're trying to like separate out, a starting 11 or whatever it is, and it's difficult.
So here's my question to you. I know you don't like the defense. We're both more offense. Do you want to start defense or you want to start offense?
We can start defense. It's not that I don't like the defense. It's just it's hard for defense. Like it's almost hard and easy at the same time. It's hard because like defense isn't sexy. Like, people love defense, don't get me wrong, but like when you're thinking about like super impactful plays, like take cornerback, for example. Like you look at some cornerback stat lines and it's like three pass breakups and like 8 tackles. And you're like, that doesn't sound nearly as cool as like 400 yards receiving on 12 catches and, and 5 touchdowns, right? Like that sounds amazing. So like it's difficult for defense because those guys don't get like the super glamorous type attention. But at the same time, when I say it's easy, because there's a few guys that like you just remember and you're like, I remember that dude. And that makes it easy, right? Because if you remember that dude from a defensive side, like he was probably a standout. You know what I mean? So
we can
we'll talk about a few.
Where do you want to start on defense?
We can start from the line and go back.
All right. So I'll give what Pops had for his line.
Okay.
And since Pops isn't with us tonight, he's dealing with World War III at home. Kids are going crazy, which I feel like every dad has dealt with. So his line is Julius Peppers, Aaron Donald, Dwight Freeney, and Ndamukong Suh, of which I will tell you I only had one of those guys on my line, which was Ndamukong Suh, mainly because like he was battling, like he really should have won the Heisman that year.
Ndamukong Suh was like an easy right from the get-go. The dude was just absolutely violent in the middle.
The guy that I cannot believe Pops left off, which was where I started, was Javanian Clowney.
Yeah.
Because when you sat back and you were like, everyone remembers like those guys. Like I can't not see that Michigan hit.
That hit from Michigan, dude, where it's like the ball's flying out, his helmet's flying off, his shoelaces came untied. Like, yeah, that hit alone put him on my roster as well. Jadeveon Clowney
I still
is
remember
one of
like the
my
whole
hands.
play because like it should have been a turnover on downs, and I remember like the announcers like, oh well, we'll see what happens. It's big hit. South Carolina deserves the ball.
Yeah,
And they do.
that was like, I feel like one of my earliest memories of the ball don't lie. Like, everybody who knows that where you're just like, dude, because they kind of got a bad ref call right before that, and then followed up with just the absolute hit of the year. So
Yeah, he was amazing. It's funny because when, especially in college, it was for me that's like the guy of like that sort of epitomizes what we're like talking about. Like I don't think anyone would ever put him on their like all-time roster for like if you consider pro career, but coming out of college, like I'd be hard pressed, especially here lately. Like from his time on, like there's really not been that defensive end type of guy that I think had as much hype as he did coming out of college. Like he was out of
I think
South Carolina.
Chase Young was pretty close.
Yeah,
Um,
and the Boza twins.
yeah, both the Boza twins were pretty solid, but I mean, yeah, Jadeveon Clowney was a man among men at that point.
Who else you got on your line?
So it was tough for me. In interior, again, like I don't remember really seeing Aaron Donald too much, right? It's easy to say Aaron Donald because of who he was in the pros, but I don't really remember him too much. The name that always pops into my head was Mario Williams. Remember when he got drafted over Reggie Bush? That was
Yeah.
like a huge deal. So he was in the running. I feel like you could take like any of these recent Georgia Bulldogs interior linemen, these guys that are just absolute the sizes of refrigerators in the middle there. Name that popped into my head was, do you remember I think it's Clellan Ferrell from Clemson.
Yes, that went to
Dude,
the Raiders.
yeah, and like he really kind of fell off. I feel like he's not doing anything in the pros, but I just remember him just wreaking havoc during Clemson's run there, and he's my other interior guy. And then outside as well, again, Jadeveon Clowney, I feel like was an easy write-in for me. All the other ones were really difficult. I mean, I don't really remember watching Dwight Freeney too much. I do remember Julius Peppers, and I love Julius Peppers. I feel like Julius Peppers could have played any position he wanted to. Like, I feel like he was always just like the most athletic dude on the field. He just happened to choose defensive end because he was like 6'7". But like, he could have played tight end or wide receiver if he wanted to. So he's my other outside guy.
I'll go interior before I go that other outside guy. My interior, speaking, he was played with Farrell in Clemson. I just remember how good Christian Watkins was.
Mm-hmm.
Like him and I forget what the other guy's, the big guy he's starting with the Giants right now. I'm trying to remember his name. I'm looking it up right now. Dexter Lawrence. Like those two dudes. I remember when they played Bama, and I've said this a million times, it was like watching Germany go through Poland because it was just a murder ball, that whole national championship. But that whole defensive line had Farrell, had Watkins, had Dexter Lawrence. Like they were beasts, absolute beasts. So because it's hard for me not to throw Quentin Williams in there because I feel like Quentin Williams for Alabama during that 1 year was a stud, but Watkins was a stud through his entire time. So it's really hard not to put Watkins in. My outside pick, let's see if you remember him, because this is like one of those guys I'm like, in college, this dude was unstoppable, got injured in the pros, and was never, like, I feel like people forget how good he was. David Pollock.
Oh, yeah.
With Georgia.
Oh, yeah.
Dude, that dude was unreal.
Dude, I think if you like talk to Georgia fans or like look up like best defensive lineman in Georgia history, like David Pollock's like number one or like at least top 5. Like everybody loved him. He was amazing.
Yeah, I mean he played ball like really well, and it's sort of nuts because I think when you see him on TV, he's lost so much weight
Oh
like
yeah,
from
he's
his
this like
playing that
skinny dude that you're like, how did he play? How was he like a dominant defensive lineman?
yeah, no one sees it now, but
Yeah.
those are my guys on the line. It's don't get me wrong, it was more just I hadn't seen Peppers play like he was an abs freak, just a freak coming out, but it was one of those guys that I just feel like North Carolina growing up never really got to see that much of.
Sure.
But that's sort of our defensive line. So I'll go with linebackers for Pops. Pops said his linebackers, two of which I have on my list, Spikes, Patrick Willis, and Terrell Suggs. I had Willis and Spikes just because I remember watching Florida play and watching Spikes just murder people. And then I also remember Patrick Willis on the Ole Miss. Like, Ole Miss was terrible.
Yeah.
Terrible. And that dude was all over the field. Like, he could not miss that whole time. So those are two of my guys. My last guy is Alabama, just because he was a murderer. Reuben Foster.
Oh
Dude,
yeah.
that I loved watching him hit because like he'd be ejected out of every game for targeting. But back then, dude, it was lights out. That dude, hardest hitter on the field.
So this one was tough for me because I feel like I remember a lot of really good linebackers. I'll tell you what, I can't remember where they played inside or outside kind of deal, right? So like, correct me if I'm wrong, but like I thought T Swizzle was a D end at Arizona State. I mean, like I get it. He was kind of like the classic where it's like, he's an outside linebacker, but he's really like a D end or vice versa, where he's just rushing the quarterback every single play, like Clay Matthews. You know what I mean? Like they called him a linebacker because he wasn't the size of a D end, but for all intents and purposes, if you blitz on every single play from the edge, you're a D end. Like
Well, I mean that you could put two guys who still fall into this category that we didn't even talk about on the defensive line, both out of A&M with Miles Garrett and Von Miller.
Yeah,
like
for sure. 100%.
both of those guys are really, really good.
Yeah,
coming out. I mean, Miles Garrett was probably better than Von just because I think in terms of like the intangibles, that's why he went number one in the draft.
Yeah.
But both of those guys were listed as linebacker, but both of them played most of the time with their hand at the ground on the outside.
And that's where I kind of struggled because like Miles Garrett for me would have been one of them. You know what I mean? Like, because you look it up in college and he was a linebacker, but like Miles Garrett's not a linebacker; he's a defensive end, right? So it's kind of tricky there. So if we want to play that game, like I'll switch it back up, and I'll take Miles Garrett off the outside. I when we started talking about this, when we started talking linebacker, I feel like you and Pops and right away were like Brandon Spikes. And he wasn't the first name that came to mind. The first name that came to mind was Manti Te'o, which, and again, it's one of those like the whole catfish thing kind of derailed his career and like he didn't do well in the pros, but like the man was a Heisman finalist. Like if you're a Heisman finalist on the defense, dude, like you're unstoppable, right? So he was my outside. And then I went back and I watched Brandon Spikes highlights, and I'm just like, all right, I'll put Brandon Spikes in there as well. But we should have said this at the beginning. Like you're going to see kind of a general theme. Like a lot of these guys are all coming from like the same era of teams. Like not, it's obviously all the 2000s, but like there's certain teams that just produced wicked talent. That like 4 or 5 year stretch of Clemson, the 01 2000 Miami team, the like 04 05 08 Gators team. Like you could take basically those whole rosters and just look at those rosters and come up with these with a talent. When we get to offense, right? Like I could come up with an entire offense and defense basically of USC players. You know what I mean? But like there's a general theme of which teams we're picking these guys from.
And it's also, I mean, some of it is definitely just in terms of what you're talking about. It's just you got to see these guys on TV every time. Like
Yeah.
you weren't going to turn it on in 06 through 08 and not see the Florida Gators on TV.
Yeah.
Like that's who you were watching. And same with Saban through most of the Bama days. Is that's the primetime game was whoever Bama was playing. Same with Clemson. Like they were always in it. So it's one of those ones that's a little bit easier to see how those guys make the list. Manti Te'o is like a really good pick. It's it sucks mainly because I agree with you from the standpoint of it's hard to like remove what happened in the pros and also remove like the catfish incident. Like I think if that catfish incident doesn't happen, he probably wins the Heisman. Like
it feels like it like took away from his football stats for some reason. Like because I know I'm when you say that name nowadays, you're kind of like, ugh, like it's cringy. But like, dude, go back and watch him play, man. I mean, he was a Heisman finalist.
really good. I mean, he was a really good player. Ends up going to the Chargers, doesn't really work. I think it's one of those picks that goes to a bad team and he wasn't going to solve all the problems. And the Chargers have never been known for it's sort of like going and playing for Lincoln Riley on defense. No matter how good you are, that defense is going to be trash.
Yeah.
So one of those things. Secondary, Pops has got Patrick Peterson, Ed Reed,
Ooh.
Sean Taylor, and Malcolm Jenkins.
Wow.
The only guy that I have insane with Pops is Ed Reed.
So I listed like 7 for each position because there's just so many. Like you could take that entire 01 Miami team and just go, yeah, that's my lineup and be fine with it. You know what I mean? You could take, I don't know, I think it was maybe the 05, maybe 08 Florida Gators team with like Major Wright and all those dudes. Like just give me that whole defense and I'll, that's my team. You know what I mean? Like you could take those whole teams. It's so, but yes, Ed Reed is one of those few players where like his absolute domination in college just straight over to the pros and he never skipped a beat. So Ed Reed's obviously on my list as well. Patrick Peterson, that's a good one. I can't honestly say I remember too much of him in college. And it's again, in looking back, it's hard to separate, what he, became in the pros. But Sean Taylor's obviously was on my list. I didn't take him simply for the fact that I'm taking Ed Reed as well. But my other safety is Tyrann Mathieu.
So this is what it's funny because I have Tyrann Mathieu, but he played a little nickel, and so I put him at my other corner position just because, like, dude, the honey badger, like, that's the word. It doesn't get the same effect. Like when you say Tyrann Mathieu, like people are like, oh yeah, I remember him. But the second you're like the honey badger, you're like, dude, he was for those 2 years at LSU, dude, that dude he was a Swiss Army knife.
Yes.
For that defense.
He, in my opinion, he was like in college what Troy Polamalu was in the pros. Like that was that perfect comparison to me. Like where and it, was kind of doing the same stuff at the same time where he was just like, dude, he's gonna make a play regardless of where it goes and wherever he was on the field. He was gonna go make a play somewhere. I wish Pops was here because I was going to throw it out there when we started talking safeties. Obviously, like Ed Reed, Sean Taylor popped in my mind. One of my, I'll call it an honorable mention, was Michael Huff from Texas. Because
my other safety is Michael Griffin from Texas.
Yeah, I mean, like, dude, those guys were just so good, dude. Like, so good in that 1 to 2 years that they were there at Texas. And I know Pops would appreciate that, so I'm throwing it out there. Corners, though. Who are your corners?
So I got Tyrann Mathieu on one side.
Okay.
And on the other side, out of Florida, Joe Hayden. Because Joe Hayden was the real deal.
I have Joe Hayden and Jalen Ramsey.
Ugh.
But
dude, how did I forget about Jalen Ramsey?
Dude, listen, this is why I wrote down 7 of them, man, because I was going through and like every time you see a name, you're like, oh, that guy's good. You see a name, you're like, oh, that guy, like Prince Amukamara, Akeem
Yes, at
Talib,
Nebraska.
Sauce Gardner. I mean, like you're trying to go look back, but like think about recent dudes. I mean, like God, Jeff Okuda from Ohio State a few years back. I mean, just absolute lockdown dudes. It was so hard to pick just 2 corners.
The other guy I had for a sec, because I didn't want to name a bunch of Alabama players. He was so good from the time he stepped on the field as a freshman, and he's been good ever since at safety, was Minka Fitzpatrick.
Oh
Like,
yeah.
that dude was, I mean, I think he doesn't get enough credit with Alabama just because of how good the other players were on that team. But I agree with you, like, especially when you look at some of those players that you just rattled off, especially at the position of corner, like there's been some heavy hitting guys, and Sauce Gardner, I feel like is one of those ones that I don't think anyone would have a problem throwing him in there. I think the reason he doesn't get enough credit is just because they played with Cincinnati. It was
Yeah.
it,
But
little name
that was the year they went to
CFP,
the CFP, right? Yeah. So I mean, like,
and he shut down
yeah.
JMO, and he didn't allow a catch, I don't think, in the CFP game. I know he didn't allow a touchdown his entire season on him, which is unreal for a college
Yeah.
corner to be able to boast that type of statistic.
One of the guys I was going to throw out there, kind of like as a corner / nickel / like you could use him on special teams, was a Dory Jackson from USC. Just one of those you remember the guys you watched, right? And again, I told you I could come up with a position for the guys for USC like in every position, and he's the guy for corner for sure.
And there's a ton. There's a ton. And speaking of a ton, as we just wrapped up defense, offense. Offense is. I wanted to save this one to the end because I know there's going to be some heated discussions. Where do you want to start? You want to go easiest position first with tight end, just
we
because
have to do receiver last.
Yeah.
But
So tight end, Pops went super high threat, mainly because of what happened post the college career. He went Aaron Hernandez at tight end, which I'm just like, all right, Pops. Well, you said it, but I mean, he was really, really talented at Florida. For me, I have the most difficult time in the world not putting Brock Bowers as my guy, just because he's for the 3 years at Georgia unstoppable. Like, I can't remember a tight end that had more of an impact in the game. Like, don't get me wrong, I think Aaron Hernandez played well at Florida, but in terms of like statistical and just consistent output week after week after week, no one better than Brock Bowers.
yeah, I'm not. It's hard to argue that. It really is, especially when you watch him play. Like, I mean, he's very dominant. I almost would. My only argument to it, and just because I'm making an argument at this point, would be because when you look back at some of these other teams, they have like absolute dominant receivers as well. Like they're competing for the ball from like just crazy good talent. And I feel like you could kind of make an argument that Brock Bowers' really only other like solid competition was Lad McConkey, which is also great, right? I've touted Lad McConkey as like one of those underrated dudes, but again, like he's not anywhere on the list for like top wide receivers in college. You know what I mean? So, and again, Aaron Hernandez is competing against Percy Harvin, which, spoiler alert, he's on my list. Yeah. Right. So that's my only argument against Brock Bowers. It's not a good one, but I was trying to avoid like super recency bias because again, it's really easy to just say Brock Bowers. And again, just talking about dudes you grew up watching, it's Mercedes Lewis for me, dude. I think he's still playing, for God's sakes. Like, I'm pretty sure he's still on a roster. And I want you to think about that. Like, he was playing with Reggie Bush and Maurice Jones-Drew and Matt Leinart. And like that was when Mercedes Lewis was playing. Like, think about how long those dudes have been out of the league, mainly because they didn't do very well. But like, Mercedes Lewis was an absolute beast, dude. I mean, he's still a beast, but like in college, he was just this gigantic red zone target that was just, it was so hard to stop.
He was on an active roster last year. He was with the Bears, and last year he was the only player remaining from the 2006 draft
There you
still in
go.
the NFL.
I mean, the man's the Tom Brady of tight ends, dude. Like, he's just been playing forever. Now, he hasn't had like an amazing pro career, but like his college career, dude, he was unstoppable. And I remember we talked about it when we were like, all I can think about is Brock Bowers. There's been a few good tight ends. Notre Dame has put out a couple good ones, like Tyler
And that's what I was about to
Eifert.
say. Tyler Eifert. That was going to be
Eifert.
my honorable nominee.
They had another one. I can't remember what his name was. He was pretty good though. Iowa's put out a few good ones.
The problem with Iowa is their offense is always so trash that, I mean, I don't know who it is because I just don't know punters' names, but that's probably who I would take for the punter position. It's just whoever's punting the ball for Iowa, because that dude gets a million reps every single season.
Dude,
but
my honorable mention was Jeremy Shockey.
The issue, I didn't. This was the thing, that 2001 Miami Hurricanes team.
Yeah,
like I think they produced 9 Hall of Fame players.
Best team ever assembled,
dude. It's
and like
unreal talent.
If anybody says anything different, you're just wrong. Like, I'm not a Miami fan. I'm a USC fan. I think the 04-05 USC team is number 2 and a solid number 2, but it not even close. Like that 2001 Miami team was just out of this world.
And just to remind people, like, we're talking Clinton Portis, Willis McGahee, Andre Johnson, Ray Lewis, Ed Reed, Jeremy Shockey, Jonathan Vilma. Like, dude, it was unreal amount of talent. And
you wonder why they won. Like, every single position was filled with a legitimate NFL talent.
Yeah.
And I mean, that just like doesn't happen nowadays.
No, 100% not. It's as good. And what's really impressive about the 01 Miami's team is what they continue to do in the NFL. Like, I think that's what really cements them, is that, I know we're only looking at college here, but when you look at what those guys did in the NFL, you're like, dude, they were the real deal.
Yeah.
The real deal. All right. You want to go quarterback or running back before we get into wide receiver?
Let's do running back first.
For me, it's not a debate.
Number 1 is Reggie Bush.
Yes.
Easy.
Number 2 is a debate.
Yes.
And it's because, dude, you've thrown his name out a million times. Michael Bush for Louisville, like, had an amazing year. I remember Darren McFadden just running over guys. And then I have to sit back and it's like, one of the guys, my number 2, and I know it's easy, but when you just like, it's easy because we think about him in the pros, but his 1 year, Christian McCaffrey.
Ooh,
dude, like, that dude did everything for Stanford.
Ooh.
Like, he was so good. And I know a lot of people thought he should have won the Heisman over Derrick Henry. And you look at like the Alabama running backs. I mean, you got Henry, Ingram, Yeldon, Richardson, like Lacey. You have all these different guys. But, dude, Christian McCaffrey was special.
Dude, that's a good pick. I didn't even have him on my list, but that's a really good pick. Stanford put out some good running backs.
Bryce Young, Breece Hall. I mean,
Toby Gerhart. Do you remember Toby Gerhart in college, dude? Again, he didn't do anything in the pros, but he was amazing.
He ran all over teams. He was second in the Heisman.
That's a good one. Michael Bush was my honorable mention, not because like I really would think he would be on the list. We've just talked about it. He was just so fun to watch. I just loved watching him play. I had McFadden. He was my Reggie was obviously number 1. McFadden was my immediate number 2 that came to my mind, and then as you kind of go through all these guys who you think you would put on there, I danced back and forth between two. It was McFadden and I think the guy I ended up going with. And again, it doesn't sound super sexy again because we're kind of talking about like what we did in the pros and what we expected, but I just think about again the 1 year. This is who I thought you were going to pick at Penn State was Saquon, dude. I mean, Saquon to me was like that again, that 1 year in college. We're talking college. It was just he was giving you like Bo Jackson vibes where you're just like, dude, this guy is unstoppable.
Saquon was unreal at Penn State. The issue is that I don't think he got enough hype. Like he was very, very good, but for me, it was one of those ones where the rest of the offense was so bad that it really didn't give him the chance to shine, and they didn't win enough games and like compete in the
it's
Big Ten.
Classic Penn State.
Yeah, 100%. I sit back and like the things that like I'm always remembering is I forget what the guy I've been trying to find his name. The running back from Cal that was so fast that hurt his neck. And then you have West Virginia during that time period. I know he was a wide receiver, but Trayvon Austin,
yeah,
like and Pat White, those guys were like incredibly good. Marshawn Lynch was good out of Cal. He really gained popularity. The only thing I remember from him in college is what?
Riding in that golf cart.
Like little did we know that was the Marshawn that we were going to grow up and love watching. Another like slept on name that was really good in college, Adrian Peterson.
Oh yeah,
with Oklahoma.
Yeah.
Like he was great. And Oklahoma's produced like P. Ryan. Like they've produced just a stable of different running backs that didn't really produce like to the level of AP in the pros, but in college, tremendous running backs. Like,
yeah, who was the dude that won like the rushing title with Dallas and then went to
DeMarco Murray?
Yeah, DeMarco Murray. He was Oklahoma.
And you got Melvin Gordon up at Wisconsin.
Yeah.
Like we've had really, really talented running backs out there. But as you said, I just want to bring it back. Reggie Bush.
Oh yeah, we didn't talk about the number one enough because it was just too easy.
It's too easy. Like especially after I love that he got his Heisman back. And I know we were talking about this on the the last time we brought it up. It's like I appreciate it just because when he got his Heisman back, they started putting out all his like highlights again. And it's like, dude, like if there was ever a debate, they just shut it right back down. Like I've not seen a player as electric as Reggie Bush at the position of running back before or after him. Like for me, we could go all the way back to the beginning of college football, and Reggie Bush is still my answer at running back.
And listen, I just to make things even better, like just to show you like truly how good he was. Think about all of his stats that he compiled out of this world. Like watching him, he wasn't even on the field all the time because we also had Lendell White in the backfield, right? Like think about that. Like think about, you're talking about Christian McCaffrey. I was talking about Saquon, like these dudes that are just like 98% of the offense. You know what I mean? And like Reggie didn't even get that opportunity because he was also surrounded by just like absolute talent everywhere, right? And like he wasn't even touching the ball every play, right? Like you had to give CMC the ball. You had to give Saquon the ball because that's kind of what you had, right? But like Reggie had Lendell White to spell him, right? There, Matt Leinart was throwing to, Dwayne Jarrett and Steve Smith and Mike Williams. Like he didn't even get to be that 90% solution for the offense, but he was still that good that it was just, I mean, that again, I go back to that step back play against Fresno State where he's running down the sideline at full speed and just goes, and that dude goes flying out of bounds. And like you look at it now and you're kind of like, yeah, it was a good play, but like it's just kind of like whatever. But I just remember at the time that was one of those like, I've never seen anybody do that ever before. Like it was the OBJ catch, right? Like it was the like, you've seen it now enough times that looking back, you're like, okay, that was pretty good. But like, it was like a revolutionary juke that like it didn't exist in Madden yet. You know what I mean? They've put the back step in the video games now because of what Reggie Bush did.
And something I think that sinks in your point even more, that like this is the best way I know how to describe it. I just remember that was like back in the day when Sports Center like showed clips. They showed that clip for that hour like segment at least 100. Like when they come back from commercial break, like we're gonna get to the NBA, but watch this juke real quick. Like, dude, it was like on like when it would lead in to ESPN for like the next few years, like that juke was in there. Like it was an icon, and it still is for me. And I think anyone that saw it during that period, like you can't unsee that. Like I always sit back and go, dude, when you hear Reggie Bush, you think of that juke, and you think of him playing Fresno State, and you think about him playing up in Corn, Oregon State.
Corvallis.
Just Corvallis juking guys. Like it was unreal.
Mine is the UCLA like 10-yard dive. Yeah.
Got a guy underneath him. You got some dude just like watching from behind, like, oh, I didn't know we could do that. Like,
yeah.
Yeah. So running backs a little bit simpler just from that standpoint. All right. Time for some.
Who is Pop's picked at running back?
Pop's pick was Reggie. And that's all he had was Reggie Bush.
Okay.
Quarterback.
He didn't get the memo we were picking two.
Yeah. He didn't listen.
I want to know your guys' at quarterback first before I say mine. Mine only came down to two guys. There was only two guys that I could really legitimately consider.
And I had the same. I had two guys.
Okay.
Pops had Joe Burrow.
Ooh.
And I had Joe Burrow and Tim Tebow. And the issue, like, I was like debating this so much. And it's because like I remember who Tim Tebow, and it's sort of this is like where the tiebreaker happened. Like I remember who Tim Tebow was, like in terms of like a college football leader, like what he did at Florida. Like he was amazing and consistent for the entire time. Like you knew exactly what you were getting out of Tim Tebow each and every play, and it was Heisman. He should have won the Heisman back to back. Like, yeah, he got robbed. Then I sit back and I look at Joe Burrow and I'm like, for that season, he was the greatest quarterback in college football history. And that's my pick. Like I hate doing it, turning down Tim Tebow, but Joe Burrow during that season, now I get that he had supreme talent around him, especially now that it's like what we've seen in the pros. No one had seen anyone do what he did that year. Like they couldn't miss. Dude, when he threw a football, it was 6. Like, and it was just like, and I love, him doing the ring. Like Joe Burrow for that year, like I know it's just 1 year. Dude, there was no one more lethal, especially when you think about like the people that you're telling me I could put Brock Bowers and Reggie Bush. I haven't even listed my wide receivers yet, and then put Joe Burrow back there. Now I get like, and this is the debate. Like I sit back and look at Tim Tebow and I'm like, Tim Tebow do really good doing read option with Reggie Bush out there. Like those are my two guys. Like they're neck and neck.
I'm a little embarrassed that I didn't have Joe Burrow on the list. But now that right when you said it, like I literally had that entire conversation in my mind in about 5 seconds where you just go, yes, the number one that came to my mind is Tim Tebow. Like Tim Tebow to me, I think is like the greatest college quarterback of all time. But when you said Joe Burrow's name, you go, that was the greatest season I've ever seen a quarterback play. And I remember watching that LSU Alabama game. And again, at this point, I'm in full blown I hate the SEC mode. Again, when that game was going on. And I remember when Joe Burrow, like during that game, I'm watching it and I'm just going, I don't want to like this guy, but he's amazing. Like he cemented his Heisman, and there's a reason why he was like he's been the most unanimous Heisman winner ever, because that season was easily the greatest college football, quarterback season ever played.
And I think
So
that's probably the best way to break it down. Like if I have to pick a guy based upon the totality of his career, it's Tim Tebow, and it's not a question. If I have to pick a guy off of one season, it's Joe Burrow, and it's not a question.
yeah, that's tough. I'll just throw out the other guy that I had, and again, this one is probably um, controversial, mainly because it's
Cam Newton.
no, it's Lamar Jackson.
Hmm.
And the reason why I say it is just, again, try to put it in like a bubble, right? Like what we just did with Joe Burrow. Do that with Lamar Jackson, and like just go watch a highlight tape.
Oh, him at Louisville hurdling that dude was
I,
amazing.
I know he was not, because Tim Tebow wasn't the best thrower of the ball either, right? And that's where it's like a real debate. Is like Tim Tebow could throw the ball, Joe Burrow could run the ball, but like both had their strengths on the other side. Where
Yeah, but look
what?
at who Tim Tebow had around him compared to
Oh
Lamar
no,
Jackson. Like
no.
Lamar didn't have nobody.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Like that's why Lamar was on my list. Is like Lamar was absolute video game, dude. Like he was putting up those numbers that when you go and create your like 6'8" quarterback, 250 pounds that's running a 4.1. You know what I mean? Like that he was that guy. He was putting up those kinds of stats. So that's why he was the other guy that I was even thinking about competing against Tim Tebow. But then you do throw Joe Burrow out there. That's I hate I have to I don't want to disagree with you. I just will for the sake of argument, and I'm going to put Tim Tebow there because yeah, you talk about Joe Burrow throwing to some of these wide receivers or whatever. I wasn't trying to really create these guys are playing together. I was just trying to create the kind of the best team. So for me, the first person that comes to mind again from like I think the best college quarterback of all time is Tim Tebow.
I don't think that either guy you lose a game with.
No.
Like either guy you're going to win. Plain simple. All right. The primetime debate. Because I think this one is like the most difficult position. Now, for this, Pops only gave 3, but we're doing 4 just because I think that in most college offenses that you see, just as we talked about, like, are there good tight ends out there? Absolutely. Is that what college football is? Not really. Like,
Yeah.
it's mainly a blocking position. Like, they bring him, he may catch a pass every once in a while, but at no point have you really seen a tight end be a vertical threat like you do in college. And college right now is a passing offense. Like,
Yeah.
whoever can sling it the most is going to win. For Pops, he had 3. Only one of them made the list, and we already said his name, which is Percy Harvin. He's got Megatron and Julio.
Which I think that's a testament to Percy, because like
Percy was unreal.
Yeah, we haven't agreed on a ton of guys on any of these. Like we've couple of us have had similars, but like all 3 of us haven't had the same guy in a lot of these positions. And for all 3 of us to easily just be like, yeah, Percy Harvin, Reggie Bush, like Ndamukong Suh, like those are that's how like those guys were the absolute real deal.
Percy was the first guy that I remember seeing on a football field that when he caught like the speed that you were just like, oh my gosh, like I didn't know somebody could like run that fast, especially like in comparison to everyone else. Like,
yes,
he was in a different. It's like Tyreek Hill, like in the pros, like he would just hit the corner and you were like, oh, he's gonna get tackled, and then you're like, oh, he's gone.
yeah.
Like, how did that happen? Like, he was just unreal fast. Like, Percy for me, like, it's sort of crazy that he wasn't even better at Florida, just based upon like what we know now. Like, he was unreal. So we both got him. I could sit back and talk about Percy. I'm gonna watch highlights now when I get off of this.
Yeah.
Of just Percy Harvin.
Dude, just go watch his pro highlights. His pro highlights are fantastic.
Oh, I remember watching him with the Vikings, and then he went to Seattle and took the kickoff back in the Super Bowl. All right? So just let me. Okay, I'll say this. So the 2 guys that he had, Megatron and Julio. Megatron was unreal at Georgia Tech, and it's it's so easy to want to throw him in the conversation because of what he did in the pros. I remember him from the catch, but like outside of the catch where he jumped backwards to grab it, I really don't remember Megatron. Julio was a freak, and I think he is the greatest Bama wide receiver.
Yes.
But he played in an era where they really didn't like use him like they did today, and that's like I can't ignore the fact that he wasn't as dominant as like other guys have been in college, and so he's off of my list.
Julio to me, I feel like was like the start of Bama going on this big run of like just solid wide receiver after wide receiver after wide receiver. Like every year, y'all had somebody. Calvin Ridley, Devontae Smith. You guys, you went on these
Jerry Jeudy, Calvin Ridley,
Mechie, all these guys. You went on this run, and I feel like Julio. I agree with you. The best out of all of them, but he like started it, and I don't know. I don't even really know the timeline. It just felt like Julio was the first one where all of a sudden it was like, dude, you got to start paying attention to Bama receivers because that guy, Julio, to me was his size. Like he had the speed and the catchability and all that stuff of the greats, but he was also just a big human being. And in college, like that was just hard to guard.
Oh, yeah.
With Megatron, you're right. Like it's easy to go like, oh yeah, Calvin Johnson, that's an easy one because of what he did in the pros. But I'm with you. Like he was on a triple option running team. Like he was amazing. Don't get me wrong, but like from when you're comparing these other guys that are just like getting so many catches and so many stats and like what they were doing, to me, Calvin Johnson's off the list. Julio is on my list.
Oh, he is. Okay.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you have him on your list. I had to throw him out because this is a guy that I think people forget because he did not have a good pro career. But his year in college was unbelievable. I mean, just he had 81 catches his freshman season for 1,265 yards and 14 touchdowns. All these statistics are freshman records for the Pac-12 and USC. Mike Williams.
Oh yeah, Mike Williams was a freak, dude.
Was a beast.
Freak.
Could not be stopped. Like his time in college, like that was one of the guys that like I was sitting back, I was like, I know Maul may throw him in there, but I'm going to if he doesn't because Mike Williams was unbelievably good.
Yes.
Like,
oh yeah.
And people completely forget about him because Reggie Bush was there, and the fact that when he went pro, it just never happened. Like in terms of what he was supposed to be, but in college, amazing.
Dude, speaking of going pro and should have been amazing, but just never really panned out. That was like the Lions, dude. The Lions at one point, I think, had Mike Williams, Charles Rogers. Do you remember him?
Yes, out of Michigan State.
Yeah, and then they had somebody else. Oh my gosh, I can't remember. They had three like what you just explained. Like think about like who Mike Williams was in college, and the Detroit Lions, I feel like drafted three of those dudes like all in a row, and were all on the same team together and couldn't put anything together.
They also had Roy Williams out of Texas during that time. But in terms of the Lions, I mean, they also went out and drafted multiple wide receivers in the top 5 every single year, it felt like. But Charles Rogers was unbelievably good. He's not on my list, but I remember him coming out of, college stacked.
Yeah.
So you have Julio and Percy. Who's your next guy?
Dude, so I had a hard time picking a fourth just because I felt like they were all like honorable mentions to me. So my third, and again, this is probably one that I don't think a lot of people are going to like, but I love it, is Tyler Lockett.
Wow.
Dude, go back and watch. I think we've done this before. Go back and watch Optimus Klein throwing to Tyler Lockett at Kansas State, and you'll realize like why he's so good in the pros. Like Tyler Lockett was fantastic, dude. He was so good at Kansas State. I mean, he alone almost won Optimus Klein the Heisman. Like, just go do it. And again, it's just one of those things I remember. It was just it's not a sexy pick, but dude, we're talking strictly. I mean, even the pros, like Tyler Lockett is a fantastic receiver. He's just never been like that, like really, really memorable receiver. But in college, dude, he was amazing.
So I have a guy in the same division from the Big 12 that played around the same time. Do you remember anybody else that played around that time?
Des Bryant,
No.
Justin
Played at
Black,
Texas Tech.
Crabtree,
Michael Crabtree.
dude, and that
He's
Mike
my
Leach
number
offense. That Mike Leach offense.
That dude balled out. Like
Hard to argue.
I still remember against Texas, like they threw it down the sideline and caught it. He had like two guys there and somehow got out, scored, and won the game. Like Michael Crabtree was just lights out, like from that position. And it was hard to argue from that. My number 4 guy, and then I'll let you get to yours, just because mine, it's going to sound biased, but I think that when you go back and you watch the season, you're just like, dude, unreal. It's Devontae Smith. Like, I know that it was a Heisman, but every time I see highlights of that dude, like, it didn't matter who he played. Like, especially once Waddle went down. Like, Waddle went down and everyone sort of knew he was going to get the ball. And the dude just, I still remember the game at LSU. Like, he caught 3 touchdown passes, and it was just like Derek Stingley was on him. And it was like they just couldn't stop him. Like Ed Orgeron, like you see him like losing his mind on the sideline. He's like, it's the only guy. Like, if we're gonna stop one player, it's him, and no one can stop him. And it's nuts because like I had a hard time because I also sit back and I look at the Joe Burrow offense. Like Justin Jefferson wasn't that guy, but Jamar Chase was.
Jamar Chase was the guy.
Like,
yeah,
Jamar Chase was unreal at LSU. Like, and I have a hard time like not wanting to put him in there. And like I can go through a ton of different offenses that like I just sort of sit back and look. Like Jamar Chase was probably that one guy that I like sit back and like if I had to give a nod over, Devontae, it would be Jamar Chase, just because Jamar Chase was like he was unreal. Like he could not be stopped. No one really knew that Justin Jefferson was going to be who he is now in the pros, which is why he slid in the draft. I mean, the Eagles picked Nelson Aguilar over Justin Jefferson.
Nelson Aguilar was good at USC.
Yeah, well, he keyword was.
Dude, so yeah, again, this is where it was tough for me. A lot of honorable mentions. Jamar Chase was on there. Dwayne Jarrett was on there for me. I don't know if you remember Dwayne Jarrett.
I do remember
from USC. I mean, he was like always our go-to guy. Like Matt Leinart could literally just back up, close his eyes, and just huck the ball downfield. And Dwayne Jarrett was coming down with the ball. Like that Notre Dame game. You remember the Bush push?
Yes.
The Bush push doesn't happen if it wasn't for like on 4th and 1. Matt Leinart throws up a duck down the sideline. It wasn't a duck, but it wasn't a good pass. And Dwayne Jarrett just mosses some dude on the sideline and comes down with it. Like, and again, that's what led to the Bush push. Like Notre Dame could have won that game 3 separate times, dude. And so if I'm biased, I'm putting him in there, but it's tough when you're looking at all these other guys out there. Jeff Samardzija. You remember Jeff Samardzija?
I was
from Notre
he's
Dame?
on my honorable mention list.
All right, so no lie, every time I think about him, I thought he was a tight end. Like I just remember because he was such a big body, I just always thought he was like Notre Dame's tight end, but he was a wide receiver. He doesn't even play football anymore. I think he's on the San Francisco Giants.
Played baseball.
Yeah. He's crazy.
Pitcher.
Mike Evans, dude. Remember that year
at A&M?
I mean, dude was just leaping over everybody. Deshaun Jackson.
I still remember the bowl game.
Dude, I just remember You talk about when we played Air Force.
Yeah.
Yeah, we thought we had a shot until Deshaun
Yeah.
Jackson, because he was like suspended for the
Spit
first
it the
half.
first half.
Came out and it was like, oh, that's how you play football. Well, we're in the wrong game, I guess.
Okay, so that's what fast looks like.
Yeah,
We got anybody that fast? No, we don't got nobody that fast. The That's how I felt watching him just run up and down the field.
It was, dude. It was. It was literally just like, well, how do you guard him? You're just like, I don't know. You put a car on the field because like you can't stop the guy. Like, I'm gonna get 40 yards deep. He's gonna run by me.
Yeah, it was unreal. An honorable mention. I don't remember if you remember this guy. He was a huge bust in the pros, but after Des Bryant, Justin Blackman
Yep.
for Oklahoma State. Dude, that year he was just on fire. And he played with Mike Gleason, that old dude that he was the Stetson Bennett before Stetson Bennett was cool. And I remember the Browns still took him, and he was terrible with the Browns. It was just like another one of those picks for the Browns that didn't go right. But Justin Blackman was on fire. And then like I had Tavon Austin. Tavon Austin with West Virginia was just like, who's stopping that team? Like, they were crazy good. You had wide receivers like throughout, and I know I'm missing guys like that played during a time period where it was just like couldn't stop them.
Yeah,
like they were too good. Who else you got? Anybody else?
No, those. I mean, yeah, like you said, I know I'm missing somebody. I was just, you going through the list, and like I said, I could, there was 8 Alabama receivers like you could put on there. Amari Cooper, we didn't talk about when we were, throwing out all those Alabama receivers. Like USC had Steve Smith and Nelson Aguilar, and all these guys that were great. But
And I mean, Ohio State's had some great receivers too.
Yeah.
Like
We didn't even talk
Michael
about Ohio
Thomas.
State. They have
Chris Olave.
They have a NFL caliber wide receiver for the last 10 years. It feels like.
Yeah, I mean Marvin Harrison Jr. I know it's recency bias, but when on the field, extremely dangerous. Couldn't be stopped.
Who's the guy on the Jets right now? I can't think of his
Garrett
name.
Wilson.
Garrett Wilson, right? I mean, they're crazy. They're just they're producing wide receivers left and right.
Yeah, and so in that it brings up an interesting point because you didn't prepare for this, and that's why I waited. Who would you have leading the team? And I know that offensive and defensive coordinators are a little bit more, I would say, difficult. What instead of naming an offensive or defensive coordinator, it's more just like that team, this style of defense. You don't even have to know the defensive coordinator's name, but to just be like that would be the offense that I would run, and that would be the defense I would run. For me, I know it's easy to say, like I just have Saban running the team. Like, dude knows how to win. Like if you disagree, go for it.
I don't disagree. He's easily like the greatest college football coach of all time. From like an actual leading standpoint, I don't know, because like I don't know what it was like on a Saban team. I don't know if it was like his recruiting. Was he actually that just good of a coach? I don't know. I'm gonna just go bias and say Pete Carroll because of I see Pete Carroll on the sideline, like being the interactive, like being that guy, and like Pete Carroll to me was almost like the Phil Jackson or like the Andy Reid, where like he was a player's coach, where like he wasn't just like I'm gonna be hard on you all the time, which I kind of feel like Saban is he's a yeller and a screamer, which has its place for sure, but like Pete Carroll to me was the guy that's like, hey, you got an interesting play you want to run? Like, let's see if it works out. Like, he was that kind of guy. Now, Pete Carroll's a defensive mind versus an offensive mind. So, that's a different debate. But I couldn't say, like, his style of defense or offense is better than anybody's, which I also probably couldn't say the same for Saban. I wouldn't pick his offense or defensive style of ball.
Yeah, the 3 offenses that come to mind that I like sit back and I look at and I go, man, it'd be hard is Lincoln Riley, Lane Kiffin,
Lane
Mike
Kiffin,
Leach.
Mike Leach, dude. Yeah. Oh,
Like those three guys, like I have to give Lincoln props. Like outside of defense, dude, that dude knows how to get an offense together. It'll be interesting this year because I feel like it's the first time in a long time that no one really knows who the quarterback is for USC and for Lincoln Riley. But
well, I mean, just go at like, has any other coach produced more Heismans in the same position? I mean, like, dude, that's a testament right there.
No, like I can't. I don't even remember. I'm trying to sit back and think of the last time that you had back to back, like same position on the field, different players. Like he literally went Baker Mayfield and Kyler Murray and winning back to back, and then
leave schools.
Yeah,
and
now he took Caleb Williams with him,
sure,
but then Caleb Williams still balled out in a brand new school, like unreal. That for me offensively, the defense, the one coordinator that comes to mind, and I think yes, it's recency bias. I think it'd be hard to argue. It's Kirby Smart.
Oh, easily Kirby. Easy.
Like, that's who I'd want. Like you sit back and I like think about, man, if you put Kirby on that like Gators defense, you put Kirby with that Miami 01 defense, it's like, I don't know if they score. Like I think
Dude,
Georgia that year when they went undefeated, it was just like, God.
I remember there was dudes doing skits where, it's like the SEC shorts, where all the teams are in, it's the same guy playing all the different teams, and like it gets around to Georgia and they're like, why is he mad? They're like, he's undefeated. And the Georgia guy just goes, well, they scored a point. Like, because that's how good they were. It was just like, we know we're gonna win. We're just playing like side bet games of like whether we can, hold you to a shutout or not.
Yeah, they got a rushing touchdown, so they shot one of their defensive players.
Yeah. Like, we're breaking your wrist after the game.
Yeah, on the sideline. Just Georgia's been that good. It'll be interesting to see how they continue on.
Kirby's a psychopath too, dude. Like he's an absolute psychopath on the sideline. And that's what you like in your defense.
Oh, that halftime speech against TCU, like you just sort of sit back and you're just like, or it wasn't even the halftime; it was the pregame. Like you just sit back and you're like, oh, now I understand how they won 62-7. Like there was no doubt that Georgia, they have a great coach. We'll see how they do this year, which I know that's sort of bringing us to the end of this episode. We're getting close. I was just sitting back looking. I'm like, dude, September's not far. And August, you got the NFL Hall of Fame game coming up, and it's like, football's almost back. I'm already looking forward to it. And it's like it's funny that you brought it up with the video game. Like EA Sports producing college football again. It's like, that's back. So I've got stuff to spell me for this like football.
I gotta go buy a PlayStation.
Dude, for real, I already ordered the game.
Got nothing to play it on.
Yeah, I know. Exactly. But I thought it was a good, it's interesting just because of how much both sides affect things. Like it's hard to erase the NFL, whether they did extremely well or that they did extremely bad. Like it's hard to remove that bias. But when you try to, you really start to remember how good some of the college guys were during that time period. That really just sort of gets forgotten, plain simple. But outside of that, you got anything else?
That's it.
All right. Well, thanks for tuning in. As always, check us out: TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, Apple, and Spotify. Thanks for tuning in. Time Pull Chalks. We'll see you next time.